Hello, everyone. Welcome to the live stream special. You know what time it is. It's 1 o'clock. Put that sandwich away for a second because we're going to go deep. We're going to go into a world that blurs into the architecture world a little bit. Collaboration in that space. However, if you are studying landscape architecture or urban design, or you're an architect that maybe wants to transfer or learn those skills, then I have the best guest for you. And without further ado, I have the fantastic Liezel Du Preez from City Design People. Woo!
Hello,
How you
Steve.
doing?
I'm very good, thank you. You?
I'm all right. I forgot, because I'm so excited to have you here, to put my soundboard on. And I normally have a clap, but I'll do a real one. So,
Thank
so
you very
thank,
much.
yeah, thank you for joining us. So anyone here that wants to ask a question, you can put it in the live stream while Liesel's talking or I'm talking. So go for it. But Liesel, for anyone that does not know who you are, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes. So I run a little small recruitment company called City Design People. I've done so for nearly 6 years or so, but before that, used to work with Steve. um, and started my career in recruitment through this collaboration. But before that, I worked as urban designer for many years in South Africa and London. So sort of learned my graph on the job, working in multidisciplinary practices, architecture practices, landscape practices. So got a bit of everything to refer back to. Yeah, and now I try and help you guys find the right job.
Cool. Very interesting. So I studied architecture. Okay. And so these what I find interesting, because you've kind of done a bit of dual roles, because landscape architecture you know really well, but also urban design, you've done that role as well. So
Yeah.
perhaps maybe to start with, it'd be really cool if you could say the similarities but also the distinctions between both of those roles. So what does a landscape architect do and what does an urban designer do?
Yeah. So I guess urban design is grown out of a special interest in architecture within, for the bigger scale things, for the how cities work, how we develop larger areas, how we renew larger areas within the city. So usually, urban design flows out of architecture.
Yeah.
But you can also, approach it from lots of other different backgrounds. Often, the sort of environmental sciences, geography, planning. But it's definitely a concern with the bigger design issues that face cities, and how to do that, and to grow our cities and expand them and improve them.
Yeah.
Landscape architecture, often looks at the same issues, the same concerns, but like architecture, it can be a bit more focused on the site and development and construction. So, you might be really very much ultimately involved in the design and delivery of public realm, uh, parks, open spaces, and so on.
Yeah.
So, these things work together, and can overlap, and be a speciality for you. I often see urban designers and landscape architects singing, you know, the same the same story, the same hymn book. It's
Nice.
a very closely related field.
Okay, cool. Same mantra, same goal, improving the public space as well as
Yeah,
everything else.
yeah, yeah.
I love that. What I would love to know as well, and you can probably bring me a little bit up to date, because in architecture, part one, part two, part three, I understand really well. And now we've got architectural apprentice, which is kind of the new route on the block. And recently, the ARB is thinking of doing changes to that. But how does one then study become a landscape architect or an urban designer? Is it a case of that there's a particular course or narrative, or like you said, to maybe people who have done architecture, but maybe they do a master's with more urban and stuff like that, so they kind of blur into that world? I mean, what's the typical ways,
Yeah.
Liezel, to get into the industry?
I would say maybe it's better to look at it going backwards
Okay.
in
Yeah.
urban design and landscape, because, as I said, people get into it from so many different
Yeah.
angles and undergraduate degrees. I think for a landscape architect, in general, it's probably, if that's your ultimate goal and you want to be a landscape architect, maybe even become chartered and get your chartered membership of the Landscape Institute, it's definitely advisable to, kind of do a master's degree in landscape architecture. And
Yeah.
that is sort of classically what employers would like from you. And then, but before that, you could come into it with an undergraduate landscape degree, geography, environmental sciences, architecture, horticulture. There's a range of undergraduate degrees that feed into landscape architecture as a speciality. Urban design, similar. People come into it from a planning undergraduate degree, sometimes being fully qualified architects as well, and then going and doing an additional master's in city planning, urban design. There's a range of urbanism kind of master's degrees that you can pursue, dependent on an emphasis that you have yourself. So there's lots of different avenues. I think the commonality, I think that sits with all of these and can be harder for some people than others, is a fairly, a fairly important thing, of course, in the
Yeah.
design field, is that sort of ability to draw, the ability to express yourself in a graphic way. Is really, it's really important that if you're coming from a planning background, if you want to be an urban designer, if you want to be a landscape architect, you need to develop those skills to communicate in a spatial and graphic way, which sometimes you need to pay special attention to as you progress through your career, and especially when you do your masters, is to try and enhance your skills that you might lack from somebody who's come through an architectural education, where there's so much more emphasis on spatial ideas, drawing, visualization of concepts and ideas.
Wow, that's really insightful. When you were speaking there, talking about communicating graphically and so on and so forth, and I think that it's interesting that when people study architecture, they've got to draw. They learn to draw, and then they go on a bit of software, they do all the renders, and then hey, right now, if you're looking, you come to me for a job. If you have Revit, which isn't very academic, that's kind of like the hot piece of software that a lot of architecture practices use. What I'd love to know from your perspective, Liezel, and where I'm getting with this is, what is the day-to-day when you go into the industry? What does that job like for an urban designer or a landscape architect? And is it, like you say, very visual communication, or do they use particular pieces of software like Revit is adopted in the architecture industry?
So I think important skills, both in terms of software, but
Yeah.
other skills that are important for you to have, in the qualities
Yeah.
and skills. It is really important as an urban designer to have excellent communication skills, not just kind of being able to draw and talk about your drawings.
Yeah.
It's talking to a range of people about, their environment, their sort of setting, their town, their place. You need to be able to really communicate in a simple but professional way. So communication, being able to keep your own in a group of people, really, really important. And that negotiation aspect of communication as well. You need to have it. You can't be sitting behind a computer and hiding away. That's, you get into this job because you want to make a broader impact in our world. So you need to have some thoughts and you need to be able to share it. Now, sometimes some of those thoughts will need to be shared on a piece of paper, on a computer program, creating a spatial scenario for a place and how it's going to look. So yes, you need to be able to draw still with a pencil because that's interactive and it can be adapted quickly. I would say the other sort of important graphic skills that eventually you need to be really strong in is the sort of Adobe packages. You need to be able to whip together planning documents with hundreds of drawings and sketches nicely laid out, and presentations to easy, good graphic design skills. So the Adobe packages you need to be really good at. Quick. You need to, AutoCAD, of course. I would say Revit less important, maybe in some practices because you are collaborating with architects. Yes, that's important. I think good sort of visualization skills, but ultimately you need to be really whizzy with Adobe, InDesign, Illustrator. These are the starting points, and then AutoCAD, and being able to adapt master plans and drawings all the time. There's lots of, in terms of landscape architecture, there's lots of more kind of technical software that you use for plant specification and so on. We don't have to get into that too much, but those things I often find people learn on the job, because that's sort of you can only really those things you learn on the job. But the Adobe suite really important. I think technically that's probably the first things that you need to be good at.
Nice. Well, makes sense. I think I scared Liezel Sonda when I said put away your sandwiches earlier. So you have permission to have the sandwich, and I'm impressed, Sonda, with your attention here. But actually, Liezel is spilling all the inside info. So fair play. I'm glad you're with us. Very interesting. It's quite liberating, actually, what you're talking about. It's not necessarily 5 years of BIM that you need. It's a totally different skill set, which I can't even speak. You work alongside the architects, so it's handy to know those tools, but it's quite liberating to hear that it's a totally different thing. I remember actually my first job in architecture where there was a landscape architect for a particular project, and I was amazed just because I never thought about it. Like you say, the amount of work which goes into studying what kind of greenery will survive in certain climates, what would work, where they should be, and orchestrating it. So it was very, very interesting. And what I was going to ask you here is, because I would imagine that there are some specific landscape architecture practices, and maybe there are some companies which specialize in urban design, but maybe, Liezel, you can paint the full picture of where it's like to work in the industry. Is there multidisciplinary companies? Where do urban design and architects typically happen to be in the industry?
Well, there's lots of career prospects for you as an urban designer and as a landscape architect. I mean, you can obviously kind of, as a landscape architect, you can work in an independent landscape practice that specialize in landscape full on, all the different aspects of landscape architecture. There's lots of, they tend to be smaller smaller practices, it's not huge companies, but there are a couple of larger independent practices. Usually they also have then within them strong ecological planning departments. They do landscape planning, visualizations, planning, LVIAs, which is visual assessments. There's a lot, they have all that environmental side of things as well included. Then multidisciplinaries for sure. Engineering practices often have landscape architects and urban designers within their sort of staff. Anywhere where you might have a big planning project, small planning project, engineering, multidisciplinaries, very, very popular and big employer. Architecture practices, of course, we've got lots of the top 100, most of them will have urban designers and landscape architects within their teams. Smaller teams, not huge, but they take a lot of front end work in terms of winning work, building the argument, building the new why are we special? It's why are we going to do this project better? What are we going to add in terms of value to how this project is done? Like landscape architecture and urban design teams often kind of clinch the deal for a lot of architecture practices, creating work for the rest of the practice to then deliver. So it's often that sort of strategic component within a practice. Then of course there's roles in local government for landscape architects and urban designers, as it's important part of the planning process. Then there's developers often have urban designers and delivery. It can lead to a project management role as well for you if you working, say, for a developer or a housing association and delivering projects. So there's a loads of different places where you can end up, dependent on your particular strengths and interests.
That's really useful, because it was nice really to visualize the role, and we talked a little bit about the day-to-day on it, but it's so fascinating. Like you say, there's all these pockets of awesome urban designers and landscape architects throughout the industry, and like you said, I've seen a few even architecture practices where they have a dedicated team which does more urban design and master plan, and you have different departments as well. So it is interesting. What I was going to say is, in the future we might look back at this, or maybe someone watches the replay in the future, but right now it's February 2023, and the pandemic's kind of gone down, and we've gone through all that, and we've all got our battle scars, a few extra pounds or whatever it is. We've come out the other end. But what is the industry like at the moment then, Liezel, in landscape architecture and urban design? Is it busy in your perspective? Is there still a lot of opportunities? If someone's studying now, do you think that they're coming into the industry at a good time?
I would say it's slightly different for the two areas. As architects, as landscape architects, there's a shortage of landscape architects, good qualified landscape architects in the UK. I guess it's in part, from my perception, it's been an ongoing process for quite some time that we're not getting enough people getting into the profession, and the profession's partly to blame for it, in that and this is something I'm sure you advocate a lot on this matter, but the sort of salaries that are staying kind of current with salaries and making sure that people can make a good living is an issue. So a lot of young people,
Yeah.
have to think twice about pursuing long education, and what are they going to get out of it in the end. So I think the salaries is a problem for landscape architecture. But a shortage over time, with Brexit and fewer students coming in from Europe, or postgraduate students. So,
Yeah.
they might have studied in Italy, Spain, Portugal, but then wanting to come to the UK after their studies. We're seeing less of these candidates, and then some people decided to go back to where they came from originally, during the tough times of the COVID pandemic. So yes, there's a shortage of good candidates, but there's work. There's definitely, the UK and London is a centre of design globally. Lots of international projects being delivered, and especially in the master planning and landscape design field. So there's work. There's definitely work, landscape architecture, and high demand. Urban design, it goes up and down,
Up and down.
as it's an up and down sort of kind of field, as it is often, the sort of, some practices see it as sort of a luxury, and in some senses having this sort of high level kind of teams who are very much about selling and promoting the services of their practices, especially in architecture practices. They selling vision, they selling the future. And when times are a little bit uncertain, we're not looking so far ahead, then there's less certainty, and less new work being commissioned on big master planning projects, and then urban design gets a bit affected. But I would say the practices that kind of have built strong reputation and has a really good presence in the market and is highly valued for their continued work, their reputation, they can ride most of the storms, because people value the contribution they make. So it's important to look. If you want to be an urban designer, you have to look to the future. You have to make sure that you join a practice that has a strong ethos, values the contribution that people make in the profession, that are out there. They are involved in different spheres of the development industry, and that you're not just sitting behind your computer getting on with the job. You have to be out there promoting yourself, and being involved in the broader industry. Then yes, it's a great place to be. You can make a real difference to the world. There's lots of big issues that need to be tackled, and if you've got that ambition to make the world a better place, then this is a great place to be. So you have to take a positive attitude. You can't be thrown off by the ups and downs too much, because they are going to be there, and you have to be resilient. So yes and no.
I like well, we're all about being honest here, isn't it? And there are opportunities there. I'm also amazed, like you say. So there was an architectural assistant, who was switching companies between visas, and the amount of stress that was involved in the skilled worker visa was a nightmare. And it's the same thing for anything coming in the country. Ironically, though, we have lots of opportunities here. So post-Brexit, we haven't made it that easy for ourselves in the UK. My own personal opinion, we're crying out for talent, but then it's like, can you come here? We're not too sure. So I think that hopefully, I know that architecture and hopefully landscape and urban design is on the skill shortage list, but the
It is.
system needs to change.
Landscape architecture sits underneath within the same category as
Good.
architects, so they're in there.
Okay, that's a good tip on there. Well, what I was going to say, because listen, you've got the benefit now. If you've worked in the industry like me, and we've kind of, for one reason or another, stumbled into recruitment, and there's a lot that you learn behind the scenes. It's not all pretty, as we both know, behind the scenes, and there's a lot of mechanics there. However, what I would love to know, Liezel, is there any things that maybe you weren't aware of before, but now you've had the benefit of being in recruitment? Any advice that you would give to your former self or someone currently job seeking? Because you've given a really good overview, you've given a really good few tips, but in terms of actually looking for the job and the bit that you're involved in now, if you are a candidate, is there anything that would be useful in terms of advice or practical tips?
I think the first thing is, do make yourself appealing by being kind of forever a student of your subject matter. Be involved in the industry, going to events, going to talks, things like, I would say, joining an urban sketching group, going on walking tours, being able to talk eloquently about the industry, really, really important. Then, so that, your employer will see that you do have that communication skills and that knowledge. Often, I guess, with urban designers, because unless you're an architect who then goes into urban design, it's not a profession as in the same way as architecture. There are sort of professional qualifications, but they are very sort of by association. They're not, sort of legal qualifications. So it's very much about the professional that you shape yourself to be. Landscape architecture, you can be a chartered landscape architect and go through a qualification process. And, I would say, yes, do not stump that. Usually that is doing your CMLI is up to you. It's not, you can continue your career without that qualification. But I would advise most of my candidates, I'd say, if they've got a couple of years of experience in the field, get on with it. Do your chartership, get it done, because life happens and it is very highly sought after and valued, because you get the full picture of what your job entails through doing the process. So I'd say do your chartership. And for urban designers, be involved in the industry, get out there, know the politics, the economics, the housing situation in this country. As per like CVs and portfolios, looking at those things as we do all day long. I would say, because the projects are so varied and different, and geographically different as well, I think it's important when you talk about your projects and when you present them, to be very sort of have in your mind a storytelling process. You have to tell the story of why the project is happening, what's the point of it, and a systematic, clear logic. It's less important to just have fancy drawings, like really flashy stuff, because it becomes very empty. You need to have a good story that you can tell when you interview and when you present your portfolio. So I think that just keep that in your mind. You have to tell the story of this project or this piece of work, and particularly what its purpose was and how that purpose was fulfilled by the solutions and that you've suggested. So I think those things is about being involved in your profession and progressing your qualifications, and then telling a clear story in your portfolio. Yeah, I get really bored just looking at like fancy, drawings that have no sort of logic. And I know my clients feel the same way. They need your brain. They really need your brain and your capability of communicating when you join a team.
Very fascinating. So I was going to say quickly to anyone, because we've got Liezel for a few more minutes. If you do have any questions to ask her, now's the time. I mean, you can contact Liezel later as well and bring that up. And you can, at the end, Liezel, tell everyone, where they can get in contact and stuff. But now's the time. I'm going to ask one more question on it. And then Liezel, maybe you can ask me any question that you want after, about the architecture world or my crazy self, although you've had to endure me for a while, so you know a lot more than some people as well. But you touched upon it. Yeah, well, I know we get along, but you know what I mean. You've dealt with the Welsh madness, should I say? What I would love to do, going back, if you think, or even what you see now, you touched upon just then. Oop, I got like all excited and hit the microphone. You touched upon drawings with no meaning and like a repetitive nature in maybe the portfolio. What are mistakes that people make, Liezel, quite consistently that you think, come on guys, that's an easy one we can fix? Is there anything that you see in the CV and portfolio, or maybe an interview technique or whatever, that pops up now and time again that you should flag to people not to do? Too many.
It is. I think because it is so varied, and people do come from varied backgrounds. It takes a bit of time to sometimes get to their particular strengths. I think it's the same thing that I said before. I think not telling the story of the project and the context from the variety of scales. So I think it is important in urban design and landscape architecture to show the scale at which you can work. So at the sort of, the bigger sort of planning scale, that's looking at a whole kind of region or a city, you do need to show that you think of it at that level, that you understand the analysis and the data that you need to process to understand and have an informed position as a starting point, because there's a lot of research that goes on at the beginning. So you need to show a bit of that, but then you do need to work through the scales and be able to show that you understand the implications of what you're doing on the ground at the sort of eye level where people live. And I think if you can't show those ranges of scale effectively, then there's something missing. And employers start getting a bit worried that you don't understand the full sphere of where you're working in. So I think, being able to show the whole story, all the scales at which the profession operates at, that if you have all of that in there, then you'll do well.
You're off to a good start. Now, well, that's really useful, because that's something I wouldn't have thought of, and it's very interesting when you talk about scales. I think in architecture, in particular, it can be, because it's more insular, isn't it? It's a project. It's inside. It's all the RIBA stages, so it's a totally different scale. So very interesting. It looks though, Liezel, we've both gotten away with murder because there's no questions, and Sonda keeps saying that you've got great points. So we must be doing something right. Perhaps on that note, what I was going to say is, while I'm here, interviews can be, I try not to make them too much of a one-way thing. And we know each other for a long time. Is there anything that you'd like to kind of throw into the fray of the conversation? It could be questions to me, it could be questions on architecture, or anything on your mind which you'd like to pick my brains on.
Yeah. I would say, I mean, sometimes, I think architects and the architecture profession probably should actually promote these fields of interest a bit more to some architects. Like as a way where their strengths can be utilized better. I think there should be a progression. I think some of the best landscape architects come from working within architecture, and then it's not promoted to them as a way forward for them. So I think do you see that happens at all? I mean, I hardly see landscape and urban design promoted to
Very rare.
architects as an alternative career, as an alternative focus.
I think you hit the nail on the head. I think it's seen as an alternative career where actually I see it as another fork in the road of architecture. You talked about scale. It makes sense for an architect if they want to explore urban design. And bizarrely, though, when I did work in practice, it was seen as an asset. There was one person who had that qualifications in urban design, and every time they would do a packet, they would try to submit a project which was large scale. That director was always involved in the submissions and was a key part of the role. So it was incredibly valued. But like you say, I don't see people talking about that route from architecture into landscape architecture or specializing more into urban design. Equally, I find that I have though seen resistance for someone that's done a lot of urban design, then going on different scales back into architecture. And I think that's a little bit short-sighted, actually, because equally there's a lot of practices, like you mentioned earlier, about international projects. There's so many architecture practices which are doing large-scale master plans, all this stuff, around the world, totally different countries. And it makes complete sense. You need urban designers involved and landscape architects, because in a lot of these cases, especially when we're talking about the Middle East, you're creating places where there was nothing before, so it's like a sandbox, and it's a really exciting challenge. It's completely different, but then equally, like you were saying earlier, Liezel, like a landscape architect's role in London, or it's, for instance, maybe, God forbid, you got a project in the borough of Westminster, they're going to be all over you like a rash about does it fit in, is that, and so it's a totally different vibe, and it seems really interesting. And I think where it would be really cool is, so if you're an architect and you're interested in that larger scale or the urban fabric, then I think that's really interesting, because there is a missed opportunity sometimes. And I think sometimes I've seen amazing buildings and they just don't connect to the existing fabric the best way. It's like the architect spent all the thought on the building, and then outside you've got some like crappy pavement, and it's like a terrible I don't know, unfunctioning seat and a bin, and it's like, oh, it could have been something nice here, but instead it's just a bit of a dossy area. So I think it could be really good. And the last note I say is that, especially in a practice, I do think, though, that the more ways you can specialize yourself, so this is from an architecture's perspective. But for instance, if you're an architect and then you did a master's in urban design, okay, maybe you're not an urban designer through and through, but then that offers another vehicle of talent for that architecture practice. And then maybe you collaborate with the urban designers who are equally, like you said, specializing in, is it horticulture? I want to say, is that the right word for? Is that horses or is that plants? I have no idea. I've gone totally blank. But understanding that stuff is really useful for design and access statements and planning submissions and stuff, because you need to talk about the urban fabric and the existing and what's there and so on and so forth, you know?
Yeah, no, we all need to understand what our colleagues do and how they can, enhance the end product. So, the more we can work together, the better the end result. And I think an important quality within all of the build professions is this sort of ability to not be too precious, and be able to adapt and learn from each other. And I think that's the way forward, because some of the challenges faced in our cities are very complex. No perfect solutions, and even if you if you come up with a Corbusian vision for the world, it's not going to work. You might think it's fantastic, but yeah, is it going to work? It's never going to end up exactly the way you might envision it. So collaborating and bringing, finding the best options that will work for everybody, and putting down the sort of the bones of it is important. The bones of it. And I guess another field that I think, is probably something that you are more interested in, that relates very closely to architecture and urban design and landscape, is the sort of data, the world of data, and
Oh, I love all that stuff.
where you get your intelligence from. I think there's a lot of urban designers and architects who more and more focus on using smart and intelligent, like design methodologies. So if you're a bit techie like that, urban design provides an area where people can really kind of dig deep and trying to understand these complex places and complex data that comes out of cities. So I think that, Steve, something for you to go into.
Maybe I think it might be too late for me, but if I was if I was to do it again, it is interesting, like you say, doing all the science on where people move, because that's what I find really fascinating about what your role is. Well, it's one thing to design the space, it's how it get used. And it's the old example of, like, you got a pavement that goes around this way and people cut through the path, and equally where I live in Lewisham, they've kind of put down where they think the street sign should be, and what happens is everyone cuts across, almost kills themselves, but to save that 20 seconds. And it's interesting human behavior, isn't it? It's completely fascinating.
In contrast with the vehicle, but yeah, it's see, exactly. There's lots of conflicting informants in cities, and so we have to just kind of argue it out and get to the best, and then in the end, people use things completely unexpected ways. So and that's human nature, and what makes it's fun to be and live in cities. So well, we could talk about this stuff forever.
It's true. Well, on that note, I've got one quick fire question from the audience. So Eileen Round, who runs arcjobs.co.uk, really cool company. She asks, though, and I think it was to do when we talked about project lengths and going into detail, about showing the project's perspective, do people find it difficult to keep it concise? I think that what I've learned in architecture is the further in your career, the harder it is to jam pack that all in, and then people do find it harder to keep stuff concise. Is that the same in landscape and urban design, in your experience?
Oh yeah, I mean, I get lots of graduates with retelling half of this thesis in a portfolio. um yeah, but it's just it's like with anything, people get very attached to their work and attached to the process. And you must remember, typically a planning process for a new master plan can often take years. It can take years and years of the process, from the initial visioning and studies through to having a plan that will be, and then it will go into a more of a design process, or a more technical design. Takes years. And people like want to tell the whole story. Yeah, it's really hard thing to do. In part, probably why I don't do urban design anymore. It's like the times, you have to be really you have to be in it for the long term, and concise. It's difficult. Yeah.
Try your best to keep it concise. I agree. And that's probably something I should do with this podcast as well. Wait, there you go. So I think we've reached a really nice juncture where we can probably end this now. That being said, you are on LinkedIn. You have an awesome recruitment consultancy. I'm a big fan of all you've done. I'm going to bring up the contact details, but where can people find you?
Yeah, I mean, go to my website, and I think, you can always email me at liezel@citydesignpeople.com, or LinkedIn. Those are, well, you can, maybe get there on Instagram or something like that. But I like people getting in touch and having a conversation about their own journey, and their own career. Because everybody is unique and they all have something special to offer. So the practices are varied. It's not a cookie cutter kind of area. So
yeah,
it's best to take a considered view.
Well, I agree. Well, thank you so much, Liezel. It's been an absolute
Thank you,
delight,
Steve.
as always. We've got some, smileys, some laughing, some comments that have come in. So I really appreciate you being here. And also you guys in the audience, whether you're live now, thank you, but also the replay, because this is what it is. It's the modern world. Everyone watches the replay. So if you're on your tablet, or you're on your phone, or you're on that commute, or you're thinking, do you know what, I'm interested in the urban design of the landscape, I hope this has been useful. Get in contact with Liezel as well. On that note, though, I'm going to end this live stream now. Thank you so much. Thank you, Liezel, for being here.
Thank you, everybody.
And we'll see you all soon. Liezel, stay on the stage. Don't go anywhere while I turn off the live stream. And bye-bye, everyone. And Sonda, I hope you did eat that sandwich. Next time I won't say that as a joke. Take care, everyone.
Cheers.